Hey everyone, this is Pastor Jeff Barkley. This is Monday Morning Glory. I'm pastor at Christ Community Church in Lawrence, Kansas. You can go to our website. I'd love to continue any conversation with you. We are at www.ccclawrence.org. You can find sermons, those kinds of things on this Facebook page, YouTube, other places. Title of this week's talks are Exhausted. Are you exhausted? Today it's exhausted, but okay, one more try. I'm thinking of a story in Luke chapter 5. Jesus is in the early days of his ministry. He's preaching along the Sea of Galilee. Some translations called the Sea of Gennesaret, same place. He's preaching. He hasn't called any disciples yet. And when he's done talking, he sees two empty boats. And in Luke chapter 5, he borrows a boat and he goes out probably just so that he can be heard better. And he begins to preach. And he sees Peter and some of his companions cleaning their nets. If you've seen the movie The Chosen, which I really recommend, it gives some backstory as to why Peter maybe had spent the whole night fishing. Peter says, "Let your nets out one more time." And Peter says, "Jesus, we fished all night and didn't catch a thing. But nevertheless, at your word, one more try." Well, I used to work as a scuba diver in my younger days along the Mississippi River. There's still commercial fishermen, at least back in the early 80s, there were commercial fishermen on the Mississippi River. There were also shell fishermen that collected the mussels, believe it or not. And they knew the river. They knew whether there was fish out in the river or not. My dad was a bass fisherman, a coho fisherman, and my brother Steve would go out with him. And I can remember meeting them at the boat dock many times saying, "Did you catch anything?" And they'd say no, and they had no intentions of going back out there to fish again. But Jesus says, "Peter, go out into the deep, let down your nets one more time." And if you know the story, they threw out the nets. And it says, they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. They hadn't caught anything all night long, but the word of Jesus, they went out, threw out their nets one more time, caught so much fish, the boats began to sink. Are you exhausted and about ready to give up? Well, Jesus is coming along to each one of us right now and saying, "Hey, one more time." This appearance of Jesus came at the point of exhaustion of these fishermen. And then the first disciples were called because Jesus says, "Follow me and I will make you the fishers of men." Newer translations say people because we've got to be a little bit more politically correct. But he just means I'm going to lead you now to share my message with others. What if in these last days, at the point of our exhaustion, Jesus is calling us one more time to let down our nets? I think that he is. Think about your week this week. You may feel like you have been fishing all night since March, since the lockdowns began, social distancing began, working from home began, pros and cons to working from home, obviously. But let's just say this. Let's say that you feel like you've been praying all night with little good. You've been parenting all night with little good. If you're a pastor like me, you've been preaching all night with little effect. I'm blessed. I don't think that's been my case, but I understand the feeling because I've experienced it many times. You've been serving others at work to no effect. You've been repairing the same IT problems from home or at work, wondering when they're going to break it again. And you're just tired and you're exhausted. You've been fixing the same problems over and over again. You've got a problem to fix today as you go to work, and you're just exhausted. I think Jesus is going to show up in all of our lives. At the point of our exhaustion, Jesus will appear and say to us, "Let down your net one more time." And we may be shocked with the results of our obedience. So this morning, if you're tired, let me just encourage you. If Jesus is speaking to you, something to do one more time, try it and see if your nets don't come back full and you find yourself standing in a sinking boat. You're so overwhelmed at the goodness of Jesus. If you're not a Christian, I want to talk to you more about that. Jesus came along to save those that were lost. How are we lost? We're lost in our sins. We're lost in the confusion of this broken world. And the gospel that Jesus taught redeems us from that as we acknowledge his righteousness and we give away our sin. So if you're exhausted, let me just encourage you, give it one more try. Jesus is going to show up. I promise you. God bless.